I gotta go put drops in my eyes before I look at that. Hi, Margot Shepherd. Hope you're well. Margot says, I've been confused about your start time till I realized we don't have daylight savings in Hawaii. So it's only a 5 hour difference, not six. For a while, anyway. We'll change back again in a while, right? Hi, Susan. There are also a number of other of you here, but I don't see you showing up yet, so I will greet you when I see you. But thank you for coming. And thanks for waving, Susan. How's my sound this evening? Have I got any echo problems? Hi, Jeff. Nice to see you. Okay. Hi, Gary Howe. It's great to see you too. Not that I have any echo problems. Susan says, good, good. That's very good. Okay, I guess I'll get started today. Uh, I'll leave some links later. Okay, there are some links, okay, for the live stream, but I'll leave them at the end of the show instead of at the beginning of the show. Hi, Lana. Thanks for the feedback on my sound. Hope my camera's all right too. My software recently changed for the camera. Okay, there was an update, so there might be a little change there. Anyway, uh, I had a few things on Medicare for All I'd like to point out, and then there's a bit of something to call your attention to in the area of the climate emergency, and then there's news that's very relevant to Bernie Sanders. Okay, and of course, Medicare for All is also very relevant to Bernie Sanders. But what I want to start off with is actually the climate emergency, and specifically the climate emergency in Australia. An article appeared in Common Dreams. Here it is. It's by Jessica Corbett. And oh, Bonnie is doing me the favor of turning off my light because she knows that I look much better with my light off than with my light on. The title of the article is Demands for Bold Climate Action Mount as All But Rainless, quote unquote. Australia faces catastrophic, quote unquote, fire danger. And I'll take away now the extraneous matter, but that's quite a picture of fire raging in Bobbin, Australia on November 9th as firefighters try to contain dozens of out of control blazes around the state of New South Wales. Yes. And there we go. So there are demands for bold government action to combat the climate emergency, and they continued to mount in Australia on Monday, as the continent had hardly any rain for the first time on record, while more than 100 fires burned across two eastern states. That's the whole continent. An area the size of the United States had hardly any rain for the first time on record. Now, they've had droughts in various areas, okay, of Australia before where there hasn't been any rain. But we're talking about an area roughly the size of the United States. I forget whether Australia is a little smaller, okay, or a little larger, but whatever. Uh, Try to imagine the whole United States not having any rain. And that is, I think, just amazing. The Bureau of the Meteorology Bureau in the Australian government, quote, forecast Australia to be all but rainless for the day, aside from a tiny splotch off the Kimberley in western Tasmania. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, and a Bureau spokesman said, quote, the team can't comprehensively identify a day in our records where there hasn't been rain somewhere on continental Australia, unquote. Harold's report was shared on Twitter by well-known advocates of climate action, including 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben, as well as writer and meteorologist Eric Holdhouse, who declared that we are in a climate emergency. And he said there was no rain anywhere in mainland Australia today. Tasmania, of course, is not on the mainland. Tomorrow, for the first time ever, Sydney will be at a catastrophic risk, of wildfire, a brand new category of risk. Meanwhile, firefighters battled over 45 bushfires in Queensland and over 60 blazes in New South Wales, the country's most populous state. After 3 were killed over the weekend, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian declared a week-long state of emergency. Authorities warn Australia is facing the most dangerous brush fire week this nation has ever seen. "Quote unquote." Hundreds of schools will be closed Tuesday, for which the Bureau, the Meteorology Bureau, has forecast a catastrophic fire danger, the highest of 6 levels, covering the Greater Sydney, Greater Hunter, and Illawarra, Shoalhaven areas. Carol Sparks, a mayor who lost her home in a fire near the New South Wales town of Glen Innes, told the Associated Press that it's climate change. There's no doubt about it. The whole of the country is going to be affected. We need to take a serious look at our future, unquote. And the Extinction Rebellion Vic at XR tweeted, "Hear them, support them. Quote, the trees are dying and they're so dry, and volatile, unquote." Mayor Carol Sparks said, quote again, "We've got no water in our dams, no water in our rivers, no water in our creeks," unquote. That tweet was on November 10th, 2019. Newcastle City Councillor and former ABC journalist Carol Duncan told the New Daily, quote, "I'm disturbed that our government has ignored and continues to ignore the repeated calls for genuine climate action from our community and from the scientists who have warned us that climate change will make bushfires and other natural disasters happen more frequently and become more intense," unquote. "We can't continue to pretend it's related," added Duncan, whose father's home was destroyed by fire a few weeks ago. And she tweeted, "This is my father's home being destroyed by hashtag NSW fires a few weeks ago. Just one of 64 in this fire. Fire alone. 2 of his friends were killed. My brother and his wife have today had to evacuate their home. I think now is a very good time to talk about hashtag climate change." And there's a Twitter link just yesterday, on November 11th, 2019. Of course, it's already November 12th in Australia as we broadcast. The southeastern Australian state of Victoria, which has sent hundreds of firefighters north to help with the ongoing blazes, hasn't yet endured deadly fires by this year. However, it is currently bracing for a very extreme heat wave that has, quote, the potential to kill hundreds of people, cripple public transport and the electricity supply, and strip $1 billion from the state's economy, unquote. The Sydney Morning Herald reported on Monday. Recalling the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires that killed 173 people and led to 374 additional heat-related deaths. The Herald said that, quote, the Department of Environment, Land, Water, and Planning's grim assessment is that a 1 in 110-year heat wave, more destructive than the 1 in 25-year scorchers in 2009-2014, is a real possibility, with the likelihood set to double in the next 11 years, unquote. In terms of efforts to curb planet warming emissions and avert global climate catastrophe, Australia ranks as one of the worst among the world's 19 largest economies, and the EU, according to Climate Transparency's G20 Brown to Green Report 2019, which was released on Monday. Global Partnership's annual report evaluates where each G20 country is regarding the 2017 Paris Climate Agreement's primary goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius based on 80 indicators for the mitigation, adaptation, and financing of the climate emergency. None of the analyzed nations are on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, underscoring the need for urgent action on a global scale over the next decade. But the findings for Australia, and there's a PDF link for that, spark particular concern, especially given current conditions on the continent. And it goes on to talk about Australia being behind on climate action in nearly every dimension. And that was a statement by Bill Hare, who's the chief executive of Climate Analytics and an Australian co-author of the report, told The Guardian. Although Australia has one of the best solar energy potential and wind potential in general of any of the G20 countries, Hare said, quote, the country is not transforming its energy system and is focused on building coal and gas, and has not paid any attention to the need to transition to a zero-carbon economy, unquote. Hare specifically called out Australia's Liberal National coalition government. It's actually a neoliberal coalition government, charging that, quote, the government is led by politicians who in one way or another deny either the science or are de facto denying it and actively and willfully opposing or obstructing climate policies. The Australian government's lack of leadership on the climate emergency added leaves Australians people exposed economically, politically, and environmentally. Okay, Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister Scott Morrison said to reporters Saturday that he hadn't considered it if the fires were tied to the climate crisis, saying that he hadn't considered whether they were tied to the climate crisis. Catch that. Saying that, quote, my only thoughts today are with those who have lost their lives and their families, the firefighters who are fighting the fires, the response effort that has to be delivered, and how the Commonwealth has to respond in supporting those efforts, unquote. The perfect response for a politician who has no clue. Sound familiar? A tweet from Now This News. We've never seen this many fires concurrently at emergency alert level. This POV footage shows what firefighters see as they fight Australia's historic wildfires. And Adam Bandt, a spokesperson for the Green Party of Australia, said Saturday that Scott Morrison has not got the climate crisis under control, unquote. And he added, quote, let me be clear. I'm not saying the Prime Minister is directly responsible for the fires and the loss of life, but he has contributed to making it more likely that these kinds of tragedies will occur, unquote. A careful statement. However, coalition leaders continue to dismiss the climate connection to the bushfires on Monday. National Party leader and Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack told ABC Radio National that, quote, We've had fires in Australia since time began. And what people need now is a little bit of sympathy, understanding, and real assistance. They need help. They need shelter. Unquote. Undoubtedly, they do. But for next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that and forever, they need to come to grips with the climate emergency. Quote, says McCormick, they don't need the ravings of some pure, enlightened, and woke capital city greenies at this time when they're trying to save their homes, when in fact they're going out in many cases saving other people's homes and leaving their own homes at risk, unquote. Added McCormick, who took aim at Bant and Greens leader Richard Di Natale. Quote, is a tweet from Greg Mullins, former New South Wales Fire and Rescue Commissioner. If anyone tells you, quote, this is part of a normal cycle, unquote, or, quote, we've had fires like this before, unquote, smile politely and walk away because they don't know what they're talking about, unquote, says Greg Mullins, the Fire and Rescue Commissioner. Bant, the Greens MP, responded by doubling down on his previous comments, declaring that this government has had every opportunity to minimize the risk of these catastrophic fires, and instead it has chosen to pour fuel on the fire. Michael McCormick and Scott Morrison bear some responsibility for what is happening at the moment, Bant said, because they've done everything in their power to make these kind of catastrophic bushfires more likely, unquote. So that's the situation in Australia. Much like here, we have governments unwilling to respond, the climate emergency getting worse and worse, and catastrophic fires, unprecedentedly catastrophic fires, now occurring. When will this change? Australia needs its own progressive movement. Oh, by the way. Oh, did I share this with you? I don't think I did. So, anyway, before we leave it, there it is. I'm sharing it with you now, but I need to be in this view anyway when I go to the next one. So let me go back here. And get rid of this and see what I have lined up next. The next article is from TruthDig. Title is Governments Beware, People Are Rising Up All Over the World. This was written by Sonali Koltakar for TruthDig. And making that more visible for you. Lately, there seemed to be an unusually large number of mass resistance movements unfolding in all countries all over the world. Then she mentions Puerto Rico and Peru, also Bolivia, Ecuador, and Chile in the Caribbean. Haiti is experiencing its worst turmoil since the 2004 ouster of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. On the other side of the planet, Arab nations like Iraq and Lebanon have erupted into mass upheavals. Sudan, just a few months ago, toppled dictator Omar al-Bashir, and now once his party disbanded. And in Hong Kong, months of mass sustained protests have brought the other nation to a standstill. What is happening? Last time I checked, I didn't think that Hong Kong was exactly a nation. I think that may be a little bias in the press. Have brought the former Crown colony, which now technically belongs to China, but has a considerable amount of local autonomy, that Hong Kong has been brought to a standstill. The rest of China seems to be going along just fine. There are common themes running throughout this widespread global uprising. The unrest is marked by a deep dissatisfaction with an economic order that benefits elites over others, combined with outrage against authoritarianism and the use of force to uh, quell dissent. Of course, that's not going on all over the world. In the Bolivia situation, uh, what there is instead is a military coup by the right wing in Bolivia, and by Evo Morales taking advantage of an offer of asylum, from Mexico, actually leaving Bolivia and flying to Mexico and having his asylum there, but saying he'll be back at some later time. Often these are intertwined as regimes use force to maintain the unequal economic order and demand public subservience, and obedience. I ought to mention also that with respect to Hong Kong, it looks like that there we're seeing the country tied up by people who favor a neoliberal regime and who are fearful of the takeover of Hong Kong by the Chinese uh, government. So that's what that particular disorder, is about. It isn't of a piece with most of the rest of the uprisings in the world, and disorder in the world. It may have more in common with the right wing uprising in Bolivia than it has with what's going on in Chile, for example, or in some of the other countries where we're seeing uprisings. So, then a new proposed rule or law, seemingly innocuous at first, lights the spark of protest over long simmering issues. In the internet age, activists organize with greater ease than before and are highly educated about their plight, giving them a greater ability to document and share abuses far and wide. And so now he says, I spoke with three people to try to understand the common threads of protest in Chile, Lebanon, and Hong Kong, and to explore why and how people have been rising up and organizing in the face of inequality and repression. And Mia Dragnich is a sociologist from Chile and a doctoral candidate in Latin American Studies at the University of Chile. She considers herself a feminist scholar, and militant, and in the midst of her current tenure as a visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego, she explained to me in an interview that Chilean President Sebastian Pinera, quote, has not attempted to dialogue with social movements nor changed any of the type of structural factors that have given rise to the current crisis. Chileans rose up after the announcement of a hike in subway fares, but as is often the case, their response to the fare hike was symptomatic of a broader economic resentment. In fact, although Chile has been lauded for being an economic miracle, it experiences the highest level of inequality among the OECD nations. Quite a distinction, even a higher level of inequality than the United States. Excuse me. So, according to Dragnich, the protesters are, quote, demanding social rights because the Chilean state has privatized those rights and converted itself into a guarantor of the rights of the private sector, unquote. Those, quote, social rights, unquote, she says, include, quote, education, health, and housing. Okay, Dragnich recently authored a statement titled, quote, International Community Against the Militarization of Chile, unquote, which was signed by thousands of academics, activists, and others. The statement demands the president's resignation and denounces his militarized response to the protests. But so far, Piñera's response has been to oust 8 ministers, but he has resolutely refused to resign from his own position. And, Dragnich pointed out, but Piñera has, quote, handed power to a military general to handle the protests, unquote. Many fear that such a move is actually reminiscent of Chile's violent past when the U.S. backed the brutal 1973 coup against the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende and helped install the notorious dictator Augusto Pinochet. Across the world, in Lebanon, President Said Hariri was more responsive, to dissidents than by Chile's by Piñera, resigning after just 13 days of sustained mass protests in cities all over the country that included the formation of a human chain. As with the subway fare incident in Chile, outrage among the Lebanese public was initially triggered by the announcement of a tax on the popular texting software WhatsApp, but it reflected a deeper economic discontent. I recently spoke with Jackson Allers. In our interview, Allers explained to me that the Lebanese people are fed up with their government because, quote, infrastructure has crumbled and the currency, which is artificially pegged to the US dollar, is in absolute disarray right now, and it mirrors what's happened around the Arab world since 2012, unquote, as the US dollar, of course, has gotten stronger. Alice was referring to the Arab Spring movements in many Middle Eastern nations that comprised a wave of pro-democracy movements demanding democratic reforms. Quote, the final straw was on October 17th, said Alice, unquote. Quote again, which was when the government imposed a tax on WhatsApp phone calls, unquote. Yeah, that was a really, really stupid move. Alice pointed out Lebanon's crisis was centered on the failures of capitalism, calling the country, quote, a perfect example of a free market state, unquote, and, quote again, crony capitalism gone rampant. One of the positive hallmarks of this movement, this mass movement, unlike previous areas of dissent in Lebanon, is the cross-sectarian nature of protesters. People from nearly every socioeconomic, political, and religious sector are joining together. They say Hariri's resignation is not enough, and they want to see an overturning of the entire corrupt system. Elsewhere on the globe, in Hong Kong, which has occupied international headlines for many months now, protesters are also sustaining their activism for the long haul. Although the protests were initially triggered by a controversial extradition plan with China, they're now a response to broader issues of control, authoritarianism, and just as is the case in many other sites of dissent, the economy. Economic inequality in Hong Kong has increased dramatically and is now the greatest it has been in 45 years. Now that may be, but I've just got to ask here, is that due to China? Is China to blame for that? Or is the system, okay, of neoliberalism that has been shrined in Hong Kong over the past 45 years? I personally think, okay, it's the latter. Anyway, a brutal police response overseen by Chief Executive Carrie Lam has only hardened the resolve of a largely youth led and seemingly leaderless movement. Joy Ming King is an activist born and raised in Hong Kong and an undergraduate student at uh, um, Wesleyan University, which is one of the little Ivy League universities in the United States. In an interview, he explained to me that activists marked an ongoing ban on face masks in the public realm by donning masks en masse on Halloween while defying authorities. King, who has been participating in the ongoing protests through organizing and direct action, both outside and inside Hong Kong, through his work in the Lausanne Collective, explained that the creative action was an example of, quote, collective enjoyment and rejuvenation, a way to sustain the movement, and that Hong Kongers are organizing largely through the use of digital technology and online forums, and without leaders directing most of the actions. The anger that residents feel towards the government is aimed both at the local authorities and at China. I never found the other end of this quote, by the way, which, through its special relationship with Hong Kong, has attempted to exert greater control over the semi autonomous city. The commonalities of why there are so many movements in disparate parts of the country, disparate parts of the world, are quite striking. Free market capitalism has proved time and again to be a failure. The promised riches are distributed far too unequally, and for most, they never transpire. The only way to preserve the current social economic order is by force. And when people have had enough, they meet force with resistance and resilience. These are lessons not just for ordinary people suffering economic injustices, but for the governments that oversee them. And so that's what is going on all over the world. It's about inequality. It's about, okay, the neoliberal form, okay, of capitalism, but in many other places, it's about climate change uh, as well. And now to move to the United States, Common Dreams had a piece by Melinda St. Louis, who is from Public Citizen, and she is the director of the Medicare for All project there. And the title of her article is We Asked a Simple Question. What we received was shocking. And she says, and again, I'll get rid of the extraneous matter. She says, we asked a simple question to our Twitter followers. I think it should be of our Twitter followers, but that's all right. Quote, what's the most outrageous healthcare bill you've ever received? We hit a nerve. Nearly 200 responses poured in. People told of being billed obscene amounts for everything from emergency room visits and urgent care treatment to chemotherapy. One person reported going bankrupt from a medical incident Others included screenshots of their medical bills. I think this was out of some 130,000 followers or something like that. They have a large number of followers, okay, of Public Citizen, okay, on the internet. So uh, she was impressed with the 200 responses that poured in. Here's what some of the bills said: "Quote 26,000 for a colonoscopy," unquote. "Quote 10,000 for a kidney stone," unquote. "Quote 70,000 for a 24-hour heart thing," unquote. That's a little unspecific. I would certainly like to know what a heart thing is, but maybe it was to put in some stents. Who knows? Uh, okay, and anyway, Melinda St. Louis says, "Quote in America, every period, signal period, one period," unquote. And there was this quote: "I don't get health care bills. I live in Canada," unquote. The responses underscored what polls show. People throughout the country support Medicare for all. They want a system that provides medical care when people need it. They understand it's not right for people to go bankrupt because they get sick, or for people to avoid going to the doctor when they need help because they're too afraid of how much a visit will cost. Quote, $1,200 for a shot of the sedative propofol for the 15 minutes my colonoscopy lasted. The propofol intravenous emulsion is available for about $27 for 100 milliliters, unquote, versus $1,200 for a shot of it, right? $1,200 for a blood test for allergies after I was told it was covered by my insurance. Quote, $10,000 for 4 hours in the emergency room for food poisoning. Didn't even stay the night. Now, the price for that has gone up. Actually, my family had an incident of that in, as I recall, 1994. And we were then in a risky situation because we hadn't quite reached 65 yet. Okay. And so we went to the emergency to take care of what seemed to be a reaction to food. And they insisted that we pay first. So we used a credit card. And they took $250 from the credit card. And we stayed for a couple of hours. Okay, and but so Bonnie was on a she was on a bed for a couple of hours, and but she was getting intravenously some Benadryl. Okay, I mean Benadryl intravenously. And somebody stuck their head in and asked if she was all right. They looked at a chart, and then they left. After a while, she was feeling better, and so we went home. Okay, she must have been on the cot for 2 hours. or something like that. We had to wait a considerable time, okay, in the emergency room before somebody saw her. But uh, okay, then about a month later, we get a bill for $1,150. Okay, and guess what? We said no way, and we took it to court. Oh, sorry, Bonnie. Say that again. 1,700? No, it wasn't 17. It was 1,150. I distinctly remember it. And remember, it was I who wrote all those letters about it. Okay. So, we exchanged some letters. At the time, they turned us over to a credit agency. We eventually said to the credit agency, which you could do in those days, I'm not sure that you can still do it, but the old laws were in place, okay, in those days. And we said to the credit agency after they, tried to ding us, okay, a few times, we said to them, look, we're perfectly willing to pay this bill, okay, if the hospital can document what these charges are for. All we want is a detailed bill that actually documents, okay, the charges, and then if these are reasonable, we'll pay this $1,150 bill. Well, of course, okay, the collection agency didn't have any discretion to say anything except for pay up, pay up, pay up. So we said to them, look, we object to your contacting us any further. We're happy to deal with the hospital if they contact us, okay, in a direct way, but we're exercising our rights under the law not to deal with you anymore. And every time we corresponded with them, we sent them, actually registered mail each time. So each time we had a legal document, okay, of what we said. We never heard from the credit agency again. We did hear from the hospital. They started some legal proceedings against us to try to collect. So we went to small claims court uh, um, 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 in Alexandria. And we had kept all of our documentation, okay, and okay, we were contacted again actually by the hospital prior to their taking action, or we communicated actually with the lawyer, okay, the hospital, but one who actually worked for the hospital. And we repeated what we'd said, okay, to the collection agency and to the hospital, to him, saying, we're perfectly willing to pay, but we're disputing the bill. We don't think we owe this bill. Okay. And so we went down to the courthouse on the day that the trial was to take place, perfectly prepared, okay, to present all of our documentation and to say to the judge, all we want, all we want is for the hospital to document that a doctor actually saw Bonnie, who the doctor was, and to document the other details of this bill. And then, maybe 20 minutes before the trial, it was due to start, we hear the names of ourselves and three other people called out, asking us to come to a particular corner, the waiting room. And so we went to there, that the corner of the waiting room, and the attorney for the lawyer was there. I'm sorry, for the hospital, was there. And the attorney gave us the news that the hospital was dismissing the case with a prejudice, which means they retain the right to come after us, at a later time. But at that time, they were dismissing the case. Not just our case, but three other cases, three other trials they were supposed to have on the same day. Why were they dismissing the trials? The truth is, they didn't have any documentation. They were billing, but they didn't have any documentation. They didn't have any explanation of their codes. They could not state in English what their bills were for. All they could do was say how much they thought we owed, to them. Well, obviously, they weren't going to get a summary judgment if they came in, that way. What they rely on is getting summary judgment, from people. And other people don't show up. So then they get a summary judgment from the court, and then they've got people where they want them. But they don't want to have the trials where they have to document everything and pay for the time of the lawyer. I mean, they'll pay for 10 seconds, the lawyer's time, if they have to pay, an outside lawyer. They'll have a lawyer, have a lawyer on staff who'll collect essentially summary judgments for them. And then they have the law on their side. But they don't want to have trials. Anyway, that was the last that we heard of it. That was back in 1994. It's 25 years since then. So that was our experience, with an outrageous bill. But that was only about $1,150. Now, for almost the same incident, someone's reporting a bill for $10,000 for 4 hours in the emergency room for food poisoning. Didn't even stay the night. Sorry for that particular distraction. I thought it might be of interest to some of you. Yet, if you read the news, you would think that Medicare for All is a pipe dream, something that couldn't possibly be instituted, even though every other comparably wealthy country provides guaranteed health care. Who is spreading these lies? The for-profit insurance industry and the people and institutions that profit now from the broken healthcare system. That's who. And contrary to their claims, Medicare for All will cost no more than our current system and may well reduce spending. All I have to say to Melinda St. Louis is, don't be so shy about this. It's not and may well reduce spending. It will almost certainly reduce spending from 18% of GDP to 12 or 11% of GDP, as has been the experience of every other country that has gone to Medicare for All. Going on with what you said, though, while improving the scope of coverage for everyone, including those currently receiving Medicare, covering the 30 million uninsured. Again, don't be so shy. It's more like 32 or 33 or maybe even 35 million uninsured now, after the shenanigans that have been pulled by Trump since he came into office. It was 30 million when Obama left. creating full choice of doctor, okay, and eliminating copays, deductibles, okay, and other fees. And of course, in the Sanders bill, okay, eliminating premiums also. But could it be that Melinda St. Louis is a supporter of Senator Warren? And that's why she didn't say, okay, eliminating premiums? Anyway, quote, I don't go except for a checkup every 7 years. It's all home remedies for me. The power of apple cider vinegar, unquote. Well, that's good for certain conditions, like it might be an improvement over some of the treatments um, if you happen to have certain kinds of cancer. But uh, I don't think the power of apple cider vinegar is unlimited. Quote, 5K for the doctor to look at my neck and give me ibuprofen after a fall. No tests, no scans. Unquote. But you might have some peace of mind because at least the doctor concluded your neck was not broken. I don't know. Unquote. 135,000 for a broken ankle. Unquote. With Medicare for All, the vast majority of families will spend less on health care than they do now on premiums, copays, and deductibles. That is absolutely true. And quote, 986,000 for surgeries, which resulted from the original surgeon nicking my intestine during a surgery. Unquote. Outrageous. Quote, my $34,000 appendectomy. Unquote. In some parts of the United States, that's probably cheap. The United States spends far more than other rich countries that cover everyone. 2016, the U.S. spent 17.8% of its gross domestic product on healthcare, while the average spending level among all high income countries was 11.5% of GDP. She's got it right. I don't think that's the average spending of all high income countries, though, unless you throw the U.S. into that figure, jacking up the average because we're spending at 17.8%. In fact, on a per capita basis, the U.S. public spending on health care, on Medicare, Medicaid, etc., is higher than what nearly every other wealthy country pays for its entire healthcare system. Quote, I don't get healthcare bills. I live in Canada. Unquote. Quote, all of them. The rest of the industrialized world laughs at us that as Americans we have to pay to be healthy. The first word in quote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness unquote is a life. LIFE. Hashtag Medicare for all. Unquote. And a statement, okay, Medicare for All would save money by reducing the incidence of preventable diseases and allowing earlier treatment. And it would eliminate huge amounts of administrative waste and expense in the current system. Okay, the U.S. cost for uh, the by U.S. administrative costs are more than double the average in other rich countries. Between a quarter and a third of U.S. healthcare dollars are spent on administrative functions. Through simplified administration under Medicare for All, we could save more than $500 billion a year. I've seen estimates of $600 billion. I filed bankruptcy over a single copay. I had been paying one third of my income for the optional better quote unquote insurance. Cut my foot in lake, and I got blood poisoning. 2.5 weeks in hospital getting IV antibiotics and painkillers, both of which are cheap. I was billed $60,000 after insurance. On Wednesday night, that was a tweet. by the way. On Wednesday night, the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania City Council unanimously passed a resolution in support, okay, of Medicare for All. Bethlehem, with a population of more than 75,000, was the site of a town hall in April hosted by Fox News, in which the audience cheered when asked who liked the idea of replacing private insurance with a government sponsored plan. The Bethlehem resolution follows resolutions in support of Medicare for All that passed in Los Angeles and Goleta, California earlier this week. Other major cities that have endorsed Medicare for All include St. Petersburg and Tampa, Florida, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Seattle, and Durham, North Carolina. If everyone in the country who has received a shocking bill for health care were to rise up, we would get Medicare for All. The good news is the movement is growing and you can join it. Let's make it happen now, so no one else has to tweet this. I was flat broke and trying to land a part-time job at a community college. They required that I get a TB test, which cost me $35 that I really didn't have. No one should be denied work because they can't pay a $35 medical bill. That was a tweet from Calibran, One True Calibran, November 5th, 2019. And that was Melinda St. Louis's article in Common Dreams. Very striking, I thought. I'm sure this computer will respond in another moment. Here we are. Citing a deep commitment to Medicare for All and Green New Deal, the nation's largest nurses, the union endorses Bernie Sanders for president. And this one is by Jake Johnson, staff writer, okay, Common Dreams. And it was done today, November 12th. And so, pointing to his tireless advocacy on behalf of Medicare for All, his bold proposals to combat the climate crisis, and his commitment to, quote, putting people above profits, unquote, National Nurses United, the largest union, okay, of registered nurses in the U.S., announced Tuesday morning that it is endorsing Senator Bernie Sanders in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. NNU has endorsed Bernie because we need a president who will unite all workers to fight for social, economic, racial, and gender justice, and who will champion bold ideas on workplace democracy, Medicare for All, and climate change, tweeted the NNU executive director, Bonnie Castillo. NNU, which also endorsed Sanders in the 2016 presidential race, boasts over 150,000 members nationwide and has been a driving force in the grassroots push to build support for Medicare for All across the United States. We are so proud that together in 2016, Bernie Sanders and the NNU elevated Medicare for All to the national mainstream, where it has advanced to a top 2020 presidential race issue, Castillo said in a statement. Quote again, nurses are beyond tired of watching our patients suffer and die needlessly simply due to inability to pay. And we know Bernie Sanders is and has been leading on Medicare for All through his advocacy and Senate his Senate legislation, unquote. Gene Ross, the president of NNU, said that, quote, for nurses, our solidarity is a matter of life or death for our patients, unquote. And, quote, we need a president who makes it easier for us to stand together and hold our employers accountable, Ross added. Quote again, Bernie Sanders is leading all the candidates on labor with his Workplace Democracy Act and as a co-sponsor of the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, unquote. The NNU said it will officially endorse Sanders at a press conference on Friday, November 15th. So the big day is this Friday, this coming Friday. Quote, nurses are the backbone of American healthcare, unquote. Sanders tweeted in response to the endorsement on Tuesday. Quote, I want to thank the NNU for not only the strong support of our campaign, but for the courage they have shown in helping to lead the effort for a Medicare for All program, unquote. Together, he added, we will make healthcare a right, unquote. So, that was a happy story for today. Let me pull up one more thing, which I found quite striking. Also, I'd like you to keep in mind that this is all in the context, okay, of Bernie talking the hell out of Medicare for All and talking the hell out of the Green New Deal in Iowa this past week. He just did a tremendous job with Ocasio Cortez as well. People have noted before, towards the end of last week, that Bernie was beginning to surge in the polls. But the effects of this latest round of Iowa campaigning have not been felt yet. I thought that Bernie was magnificent in the campaigning on this, but a very good background piece on this is also in Common Dreams by Jake Johnson. Why is Medicare for All popular? Study finds 34 million in the United States know someone who died because health care is too expensive. And that was done today, Common Dreams. And there was a study published today, found that a staggering 34 million people in the United States know of at least one friend or family member who has died over the past 5 years due to their inability to afford sky high treatment costs. The new study by Gallup and the nonprofit organization West Health surveyed over 1,000 U.S. adults from all 50 states. The report found that people making under $40,000 per year were more than twice as likely to know someone who has died due to inability to afford health care than were people making $100,000 or more per year. These tragic consequences of our for-profit healthcare system are why a majority of Americans support the idea of Medicare for All, where everyone would have guaranteed access to the health care they need. Unquote. That's a quote from actually Melinda St. Louis, the author of the previous article I covered. from Public Citizen and Gallup and West Health also found that over 20% of non-white adults in the U.S. know someone who has died due to unaffordable treatment, compared to 9% of white adults, highlighting the stark the racial inequities in U.S. healthcare. According to Dan Witters, a research director at Gallup who worked on the new study, the substantial number of Americans who know someone who has died after not receiving treatment because of their inability to pay for it, coupled with the rise in the percentage who've not had enough money to pay for their prescriptions, underscores the urgency of the U.S. healthcare cost crisis. These realities starkly highlight the significant practical implications of drug prices on residents of the U.S., as well as the effects of healthcare policy action, care inaction. And another Melinda St. Louis quote. She's the director of Public Citizens Campaign, Medicare for All, told Common Dreams that the results of the study are, quote, heartbreaking but unsurprising, unquote. Quote again, in the United States, we treat basic health care as a privilege based on your wealth, employment status, or zip code, said St. Louis. Unquote again, these tragic consequences of our for-profit healthcare system are why a majority of Americans support Medicare for All, where everyone would have guaranteed access to the health care they need. And there's also a tweet on this from a Public Citizen that was probably done by Belinda St. Louis, actually. Want to know what American exceptionalism really looks like? Here it is, colon. I thought that was clever. The only country in which 34 million people watched as someone they knew died because they couldn't afford medical treatment. That's not exactly what you said, but, quote, in the last 5 years, 34 million Americans watched as someone they knew died because they couldn't afford medical treatment. That is American exceptionalism. And not only because there were 34 million people, but because they watched a far higher percentage of Americans died because they couldn't afford medical treatment than in any other nation in the world. HuffPost's Jeffrey Young reported Tuesday that while the Affordable Care Act significantly reduced a number of uninsured Americans, quote, the quote law didn't stop the U.S. healthcare providers and drug makers from charging the highest prices in the world. They also didn't stop the fatalities. I calculated myself and have spoken, on previous occasions about the fatalities during the Obama administration, which amounted to something like, if I recall correctly, 356,000 fatalities dating from 2010, which was the time when the Affordable Care Act was passed. It was passed in March of 2010. And taking 2010 into account, including 2010, from 2010 through 2016, there was something like 356,000 fatalities. Now, that was less than there would have been if there hadn't been an Affordable Care Act. But the point is, the Affordable Care Act left 356,000 lives on the table. That's 356,000 fatalities among those who did not have insurance. It doesn't include the fatalities among those who had insurance but couldn't go to the doctor because the insurance was inadequate. Quote, in addition, a growing number of Americans who have private health insurance face high out-of-pocket costs, such as deductibles that require the insured to spend thousands of dollars out of pocket before coverage benefits kick in. Those are among the reasons why 45% of Americans were underinsured last year, meaning patients are left responsible for a larger share of their medical expenses than they can afford, unquote. In an effort to highlight the financial pain, America's uniquely expensive healthcare system has inflicted upon individuals and families. Public Citizen last week asked its 168,000 Twitter followers a straightforward question. Quote, what's the most outrageous healthcare bill you have ever received? The informal survey elicited hundreds of shocking responses, many of which were highlighted by St. Louis, in an op-ed for Common Dreams, on Monday. And of course, I've gone through this just earlier. And the article ends with another quote from St. Louis saying, quote, if everyone in the country has received a shocking bill for health care were to rise up, we would get we would get a Medicare for All program. Quote, the good news is the movement is growing and you can join it, unquote. And I want to end by pointing out, or end my presentation tonight anyway, by pointing out that, well, I want to say two things. The first thing is I happen to be watching I think it was on Jordan Bacharton's show. I'm not sure. I was watching someone else who was talking about the Medicare for All situation. They were saying, that a friend of theirs, I guess it was at a rally, a fundraiser, a small dollar fundraiser for Shahid Shahid Buttar, who was the candidate for Congress, who's running against Nancy Pelosi in the California 12th district, and he was attending a fundraiser that was held on his behalf in Queens, where people, who were progressive were supporting him with basically small dollar donations. So he was in Queens for the fundraiser. And one of the people who spoke there said that she had a friend who was a teacher, and she was going to get her tenure, but she got injured and had to go to the hospital and had to be off for a while. When she got out of the hospital, she was told that she would not be able to get her tenure, at that time. Without her tenure, she still could teach on a temporary basis, but she would not have any health insurance. What that implied was that she had to go on COBRA. She was cast into a COBRA situation. Her COBRA bill for a single person was $700 a month. Of course, it was a great struggle, especially in her economic circumstances at the time, to come up with the $700 per month. Well, guess what? If we had Medicare for all at that time, her $700 a month bill would simply go away. It wouldn't be there. No COBRA, no $700 a month bill, no problem of that kind if you don't happen to get your tenure and you still have to work as a temporary teacher in school systems, okay, or anywhere else. So that's one of the aspects of greater security, okay, with Medicare for all. But apart from that, I wanted to point out that the only person we can trust to pass Medicare for all and to keep on pushing it in the position of the President of the United States, okay, who is currently running and has a substantial amount of support, is Bernie Sanders. Now, I don't want to give Tulsi Gabbard short shrift here. She's coming out with her own plan soon, and there are some people who think that that plan is going to have all that Bernie's plan has in it, okay, and more as well. And that's all well and good, okay, but it's doubtful that Tulsi will have the movement behind her, even if she should, by some miracle, manage to get a nomination of the Democratic Party. Okay, at this point, the movement is not behind Tulsi. It's behind Bernie. And the president will need the movement behind she or he to pass the Medicare for All bill. So Bernie has the movement, and we have Bernie, who we can trust to push for Medicare for All and to never give up on it until it is passed. So, in closing, I wanted to say that. Now I'll move over and take a look at your comments. Hi again. Let me see what you've had to say. So, Jeffrey Denton has joined. Hi, Jeffrey. And Greg Mallett is here. Hi, Greg. I'm happy to see you here. I'm sorry, that you're in jail, but I'm very happy to see you here. Facebook jail, of course. Facebook jail. That's all. Only Facebook jail. And so Nikki King has joined and said it's frozen for me. Sorry, Nikki. Sometimes it does get a little frozen. Sherry Wise has joined. Hi, Sherry. Steve Gonzo has joined, and Rob Rivera has joined. Rob says, hey, Yoda. Hey, Rob. Rob says, how's it going? How's it going? How's it going for you, Rob? But do you think Warren's massive faux pas hurt Medicare for All in terms of its support, or do you think it didn't hurt the support, but only helped Bernie Sanders? I think it only helps Bernie Sanders. And Rob says, it's amazing how the polls show Bernie is the most trusted candidate to deal with healthcare, education, infrastructure, Green New Deal, gun, and foreign policy. Yes, that has been amazing, and that's why I think that Warren's massive faux pas is not going to hurt Bernie, because It's our problem. I mean, those that 9,500 in premiums, she's laying on employers as basically a head tax. That's our problem. It is not Bernie's. Okay, because thank you. Okay, because what Bernie is doing is uh, he's going to fund it, quote unquote, not actually funding it, but he's going to have a payroll tax increase, which will be associated with it, which will be a 7.5% uh, uh, payroll tax with no payroll tax cap. Okay, of course. Susan says, I think Bernie needs to come out with an income tax proposal that has tax cuts for the 99%. Well, for some of the 99%, there's no need for tax cuts because they are not paying any federal income taxes right now or any state income taxes as well. For the part of the 99% that comprises seniors, a very modest means, uh, there are quite a lot of people who do not have to pay any income tax. And Rob, of course, sales taxes are terribly regressive. But yes, tax cuts for the middle class would certainly be very popular, and Bernie knows exactly how they could be financed. But the question is the policy space available for those tax cuts? If we consider the 16.2 trillion that he thinks has to be spent for the by by the green New Deal, then that's 1.6 trillion per year, and so that's going to cut into the policy space considerably. Rob says these costs are just out of control. Talk about absolute chaos in the healthcare sector. That's the only way for all of these sectors to make their the very massive profits. It's so obvious why pharmaceutical, health insurance, and medical device corporations uh, uh, don't want Medicare for all because it will, in essence, control costs, especially with with Bernie's and Jayapal's bill that are making the practice of balance billing illegal. But there's another aspect in Jayapal's bill as well, and that is she's introducing into Medicare for all the idea of global budgets for provider corporations. In other words, provider corporations will have each year there will be global budgets that will be set for them, and they will have to stay within those budgets and pay salary costs, and other provider costs, but from the budget that is assigned to them by the program, the Medicare program. That's extremely important because that's really going to keep the costs down over a period of time. That's another reason why H.R. 1384 is a superior bill to Bernie's Senate bill. I think the number of that bill, is 1129, if I recall correctly, on S 1129. Matt Waldy's joined. Hi, Matt. Susan Eldridge says Mayor Pete is leading in the Monmouth The Iowa poll, what the hell? Yeah, what the hell indeed. I don't know what that's about. I haven't seen that particular. Uh, in the last poll I saw just before this one, Bernie was, I think, narrowly in second place to Joe Biden, and Pete was a point or two behind Bernie at the time. But I mean, it's possible Pete, okay, has taken over the lead. Okay, in the Monmouth poll, I don't think the other Monmouth poll makes a great effort to poll people who are 49, okay, and under. I think it's a poll that's biased towards people who are 50, okay, and over. And I think that's probably what is going on, okay, with the Monmouth poll. I certainly think that that Mayor Pete is probably surging, okay, in Iowa because he is spending a huge part of his budget there. I think if he doesn't do well, okay, in Iowa, that he's going to drop out, okay, because Iowa is considered a perfect state for him from the standpoint of the region of the country, okay, that it's in, and from the standpoint, okay, of the demographics, okay, of Iowa, and also from the standpoint of the familiarity he has with the Midwest and their way of communicating. And in other words, he shares a culture with the Iowans to a greater degree, okay, than does Bernie. But I still think that Bernie, okay, is going to beat him, okay, in Iowa because of his support, okay, among people under 50, and because of the strength of his campaign on the ground. I think he's going to have the movement, and the movement is going to carry him over the top, okay, in Iowa. Susan says, I heard he's spending a ton of money there with money from his wealthy donors. Yeah, I heard that too. And Susan also says, Bernie has more people signed up for Iowa caucuses than he had in 2016. Yes, I know he does. And they have more experience at the Iowa caucuses as well, because they got a lot of experiences in 2016. Also, we don't know what the impact of. There were rumors today Hillary Clinton was thinking about getting into the race. So everybody was celebrating and hoping that she was going to get into the race again because they were speculating that there's nothing that can motivate the Bernie base more in Iowa than Hillary Clinton just entering the race, even if she's too late to compete, okay, in Iowa. Just the idea that she's entering the race would have the effect of getting all of Bernie's people excited and intense, about the campaign because they would so love to beat Hillary Clinton. Susan Eldridge says Warren says she would add a devout Patrick to her cabinet if elected. SMH, devout Patrick. The second Obama. Oh, I thought that was Cory Booker. Well, I'm not sure how much ground that's going to get her with the rest of the country. But I don't think that's a way to get her base really, really excited. I don't think that but Deval Patrick, as nice a guy as he was and as good a speaker, okay, as he is, okay, I don't think that's going to energize the progressive wing of her campaign. Maybe she needs to find another way to energize that part, okay, of the campaign. That's very interesting. Who came up with that idea? I mean, who came up with it? That's a weird idea. And Deval Patrick. Oh, I guess she's polling so low in the black the community that she's probably doing this in hopes that it would help her. What she actually needs to do, okay, is to wean away either Killer Mike, okay, or Cornel West away from Bernie. But I don't think Brother West is going to go. I don't. I think he's too close to Brother Bernie, and I think Killer Mike is also. Oh, she was asked which African Americans she would hire. So the only one she could think of was but Deval Patrick. God, that's incredible. That's really incredible. Did you see Amy Goodman's interview with EW? It was really bad. Yes, I did. I've seen it all over the place. All kinds of people are playing the critical part, okay, of that interview. It was really, really, really a bad showing. Really, really a terrible blow to her campaign. She just came off as so dismissive. It just plays into the claim that she's an elitist. It just totally plays into those kinds of memes, which of course the Trump administration is just going to level at her. Yeah, I'm just a player in the game. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. But it wasn't so much her saying that, it was her whole attitude that she was so put off by somebody asking her, okay, an honest question about, should we really do something about the order of the primaries so that they're more representative of the country at large, the first ones? That's a reasonable question. It's a reasonable question to ask a candidate. Okay, I think on the Rising this morning, or maybe, okay, it was yesterday morning, I think that Sager played a clip from Joe Biden to illustrate that Joe Biden made a better response to that question, okay, than Warren did. That he knew how to respond to it, okay, in a better way. The tone deaf Joe Biden knew how to respond to that, okay, in a better way. But it wasn't possible, okay, for Elizabeth Warren to do it. That should expose to the mainstream Democrats her weakness as a general election candidate. She's going to be weak, and she's going to be weak when she goes into the primaries, okay, in many of the states as well. Susan said Julian Castro had a good response. I'm sure he did. Did anybody ask that question, okay, of Bernie Sanders? He would probably have a very gruff reply to that. He probably say, look, I'm in the middle of a campaign. Why are you asking me such a theoretical question? He'd probably say, Amy. The problem is, Amy, um, it is what it is. Anyway, I think it showed that when she's asked a question she is not expecting, she can get rattled very easily. Jeffrey Denton says, quote, to my bones, unquote. Yes, capitalist to my bones, quote unquote. Absolutely to her bones. Anyway, any other comments or questions? So please share and share, like, and subscribe this when it does go on to YouTube, which will be later tonight. And please do make an occasional trip to my Patreon page and make a contribution there. I sorely need some patrons, some very kind patrons, please. I'm at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'm glad my sound was really good today. That makes me happy. It's been such a mess lately, I know not why. And I have no idea why my. Ah, here we go. Any other comments and questions then? Okay, if not, then I wish you all a very, very good evening. And I'll see you tomorrow night at roughly 9 p.m. for another in depth show on behalf of New Macro Media. So have a great night. I always enjoy being with you. I think you know that because you can see me laugh and get a kick out of the whole thing. So good night, and I'll see you later.